Thanks for inviting us back in. We're really excited about this presentation. I'd like to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Terry Platchek, Dr. Terry Platchek from Stanford Children's Health and Stanford University. Terry, we've been working together for many years, and patient flow has been the topic of much of what we've worked on over the years, and certainly is a challenge, and is the half the, or maybe 25% of the subject of what we are going to cover today. Just before I hand over to you for a couple of comments, just a little bit of background that every year we work together and we convene a conference called the Stanford Lean Healthcare Conference. Every year we have the privilege of getting John Shook and Edgar Schein, who is an awesome author and senior thought leader in culture and coaching. They talk together about the social and the technical. So what we decided to do today was replay some of their comments from the last conference, but we are going to give you the case study that was covered live today. We have a really tight schedule, so Terry, after I hand over to you to just make a bit of an introduction to Stanford, I'll get you in to introduce Dan and Janelle. Thanks, Terry.
Thanks very much, Denise. It's great to see you. It's great to be here, everybody. My name is Terry Platchek. As Denise said, I'm a pediatric hospitalist here at Stanford Children's, and I have the pleasure of serving as our Vice President for Performance Improvement and Associate Chief Quality Officer. And in that capacity, I've worked with our teams on things like patient flow during our lean transformation over the better course of the last decade. One of the things that we're going to talk with you about today is some of our work in our pediatric cardiology service. Stanford Children's Health is a quaternary children's hospital, so we get referrals from other referral hospitals in the San Francisco Bay Area in the United States, associated with Stanford University. And one of our most important and prominent service lines is our pediatric cardiology service line. Dr. Dan Murphy is one of our pediatric cardiologists, and Janelle Lucas is one of our performance improvement advisors. And they have been working with a team of individuals to try to improve the way we get patients into life-saving cardiac surgeries and through our system. So Dan and Janelle, I'm so thankful to have the both of you here today to give us some insight into the work that you guys have done, and to talk to us a little bit about the social side of doing improvement work, as well as the technical side of doing improvement work.
Thanks, Terry. Janelle, you want to put the slides up? Thanks. Nice to see Denise, see Terry again. Perfect. That's fantastic. Let's go ahead. And so we're talking about learning together in a hybrid world, and we're looking at a specific project here in our Heart Center. I'll introduce this briefly, and then this is perfect, Janelle. And then
no, I think this is the wrong slide deck. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. How did I do that?
That's all right.
The one I've
it makes it fresher if I don't know what's coming up next.
No, that's not good.
Well, as you're looking for that, our children's hospital, as Terry says, is a quaternary children's hospital. Our Heart Center does about a little over 600 open heart surgeries a year on infants and children and adolescents. 1,600 catheterization procedures. We have dedicated operating rooms. We have dedicated cardiac intensive care unit, and we have dedicated acute care floor, constituting about 52 to 55 beds for the combined inpatient service. We historically have run the Heart Center fairly independently with our own executive committee. And that executive committee in the summer of 2019 decided to reinvigorate an operations committee that had gone sort of dormant for a few years. And we re-established the operations committee in the summer of 2019. I'm on the executive committee and was a member of that operations committee. And when the committee leadership formed in 2019, we were fortunate enough in October to have Janelle join us at Stanford in our PI department. And part of her operational portfolio was to work on heart center flow with us. So we put together not only a phenomenal operations team, but we got one of the best experts around to work with us and coach us. All right, let's see how we did to the next slide. So there we are. That's our, and then, so I've led you up to, oh yeah, go ahead. Next slide is good. So I've led you up to October 2019, where Janelle joined us to help us work on flow within the heart center, which had been somewhat segmented from the rest of the hospital flow because of our unique situation with designated operating rooms and beds. So Janelle, I'm going to let you take it from here and describe the process once you got here and started working with us.
Thanks, Dan. And sorry about that slide deck. So yes, in October 2019, I was a new employee at Stanford. I'd been a few times to the organisation and had some connections, but certainly as far as this heart center value stream went, I was very new to it. So there I am on my own, knew I needed to build relations just to get to know how the place works. So my first was, of course, with you, Dan. We'd met before at various conferences and when you had come to Australia. But the real connection I needed to make, as everyone kept telling me, was to connect with Bob Wenz, and he was the operational lead. And I think it was really fortunate that it was Bob, because Bob is an engaging leader. He's very enthusiastic about change and about improvement. So my job felt like it was sort of not half done, but certainly I was on a good way. So to build a relationship with Bob, and it wasn't hard to do, was just to ask him, how can I help? And so the first thing he asked me to do was facilitate a mapping session. And the mapping session was around cardiac scheduling, which I thought was kind of strange at the time. But anyway, it sort of I put that in the back of my head. And so this session was actually in a room with a lot of people. So it gave me another opportunity. I'd only been at the organisation about a month, so it gave me a lot of opportunity to meet all of these people. It got me the opportunity to understand, as we say, who's who in the zoo. I watched body language. I listened to various stories. I looked people in the eye, and we built a map. And the map was all about breaking down silos or connecting the silos. Denise, if you could, I think, Denise, you're using, thank you, making the flow and the problems visible. So this is, from what I could gather, Dan, this was the first time that group had got in a room together to map a session, to sort of really think about the process. But my focus was still on helping. But I like I said, I got this idea that scheduling somehow was the piece that we needed to work on. So with that, I then said to Bob, so Bob, now what? And careful what you wish for. He asked me, and we had some discussions. And by this stage, we were starting to build a really good relationship and good banter. And I was sort of starting to move into a bit of a coaching phase, I guess. But we talked about the actual patient journey. So it was all right to look at the scheduling, but what about the patient actual journey? And so with that, I didn't have the opportunity to facilitate a mapping session. But what I did do is use it as an opportunity to go out and visit each of the silos or each of the steps in the process. And I'd learned from the schedulers what the next step was until we finally built this big map. And with that, there was again a discussion with Bob, and he found 5 areas of focus, just 5 that he wanted to work on. And one of those, again, being this scheduling piece. So scheduling became really at the forefront of my mind. But at the same time, the importance of this program, as Terry said in the opening, this is a really important program at Stanford. This is where children come from all over the States, I think even the world, to have heart surgery by one of our leading surgeons, Dr. Frank Hanley. And so there was that scheduling piece for Dr. Hanley and his work. And so this is where I sort of decided that I needed to build a relationship with Marlene, who was his lead scheduler. So with that, there was the connection, as you can see, with Marlene and Dr. Hanley at the top there in the purple. So what did I do? I went to Gemba, and I sat with Marlene, and we talked about what the stones in her shoes were. And for me, it was an opportunity to address those stones. They were pretty big rocks, actually. And so one of the things that really frustrated her and was a problem and important to her was the process of scheduling a sedated echo. It didn't mean anything to me, and I should imagine half the audience today it might not mean anything, but it was important to Marlene. And if it was important to Marlene, then it then became important to me. So even though it wasn't important to other people, perhaps in the Heart Centre world, it was my way of understanding Marlene's world. And before I knew it, Marlene was being ever so generous. She was sharing her stories. She was sharing her way of working, which was very manual, that she brought into the organisation. There was a lot of ownership. She had black books that she worked with, like appointment books. She also had a lot of paperwork, but she also had this connection with Dr. Hanley. And with that, I got the opportunity to sit at his desk, which I did. But anyway, so Dan, while I was doing this, running around doing, stalking surgeons and mapping sessions, you discovered, or we discovered, that there was a problem, right?
Dan, you are muted. Please unmute your microphone.
Good, thanks, Matt. So we had a problem that was discovered for us, that the Board of Trustees had been following a metric for several years called surgical cancellations due to bed availability within 48 hours. And unbeknownst to the people in the Heart Center, at least to me, that number had been 60 in fiscal year 19, with a goal to reduce it to 42 by fiscal year 20. And yet in fiscal year 20, at the end of the year, as you can see for this graph, we came in at 82 cancellations. So those are children whose families were ready for surgery. And within 2 days of the surgery, frequently the morning of the operation, it got canceled because we did not have open beds for them. This was something that had been known to many of my colleagues and myself, that we did cancel cases frequently. We didn't have a number. And in my experience, Janelle, everybody knew the cause of those cancellations, and that cause was somebody else.
Exactly.
Everybody knew the problem, and the problem lay with somebody else. But what this did for us is the board came to us and said, you guys need to work on this. You need a target for next year. And since we had a group that we'd been working with for a year now, we said, fine, this will be the major thing that we'll take on this year. I'll let you speak to how we got started, but this is how we took off as soon as we realized that this was now our problem. And I'll say the one thing about this is that when we went around to everyone, the surgeons and the cardiologists and the intensivists, everybody agreed this is a problem. Everybody agreed we needed to fix it. And yet no one had worked on it together in the past. So this was a huge opportunity that we had presented to us.
Correct, Dan. It was a great opportunity. And I guess the first thing we did within a week of that decision being made and the agreement that we just weren't going to be worse than last year, we got a group together and we created this huddle. And it went for about 25 minutes. And for the first few weeks, we just looked, because as you can see with the bottom red line there, we weren't having many cancellations. So we couldn't learn from cancellations because we weren't having any. But what we did do is we learned about our current state. And so we went to this 25-minute huddle. We would just bring data and fact. And we had some really great stakeholders in that meeting. And then if they asked for different data or more data, we went out and got it. And my colleague, Andrew Novak from Stanford, was absolutely pivotal in all of this because he is so clever at data. So we really wanted to just reflect and learn and plan for the week to come. So we would often reflect on what happened the week before and see if we could do anything differently the week to come. And as the last bullet point says there, the team, the coaches, the sponsorship, and the data, it was all important. And it was this valuable 25-minute huddle where we learned so much. So what I did learn further to that is I needed to build even more relationships. So again, this is all about cardiac cancellations due to no CVICU beds. So what did I do? I went to CVICU, and there I got to meet some great physicians and nursing staff, particularly David Kwalkowski, a physician there who again was engaged. He was willing to answer any question I threw at him, and sometimes I threw the same question at him quite a few times because I just to get a deeper understanding. I think he learned a lot along the way as well. On the CVICU unit, I got into the CVICU unit, which was pretty good. There's a patient journey board there, and so you can't really see it clearly, but visually it would indicate how much longer the kids were going to be staying on the unit. So we got an idea of if it was flowing or not flowing by just the indication of how much longer they were going to stay. I started to attend the 8:30 huddle that they had every morning at the board, and this is where they would go through line patient by patient what was happening with the patient for the day and how much longer, or if the length of stay, predicted length of stay, was going to change. So it was a really important meeting and lots of great conversation. And I really believe that meeting, or the information, really went from just changing the coloured tile to actually more of a discussion of, you know, what could we do to move them along, perhaps a bit quicker. And so then the last photo there is of David Krakowski. So this is the physician that we fondly refer to him as just as DK. And there he is, not only at the board, but sitting at the board. And he's now introduced this new process that when the kids are coming up from surgery, how long we think they're going to be on the unit. So right from the get-go of getting that understanding of how long the patient's going to be there. So our initial understanding was pretty basic, I guess. We were just looking for the competing interests for the CVICU capacity. So that's in the middle. And we knew kids were coming in from all sorts of places and ways, but the primary way was through that cardiac schedule. And again, here's that schedule, that cardiac surgery. Again, ringing that bell for me that we needed to perhaps look there. So what we did was to understand, to get patients in or anything in, you need to get things out. So we started looking at that outflow. So again, we had the patient journey board, which told us how much longer the kids were going to be on the unit. But at the same time, every night we had a look at how long they'd been on the unit. And so you can see in the dark red, which changes a bit, the volume, that's the number of, that's how many kids, have been there greater than 20 days. So for a while there, we had up to 50% of the patients on that unit had been there longer than 20 days. You can see toward the end of that graph where the greeny blue has become more prominent. That's less than 7 days. The unit's starting to flow, and so that again started to tell us some stories. Our inflow, we were well aware that there was that cardiac surgical schedule, which we also understood changed a lot. We got from the board the kids that were coming in from surgery, how long they were predicted to stay, but also all the other different ways of the patients coming in. So with the outflow and the inflow, our Thursday meeting started to then, we created what we call the predictor tool. And the top line was on the Thursday, what did we think was going to happen next week? So the first three columns are all about, the first three columns are about the outflow, the next few are about the inflow, and then any other miscellaneous things that could impact on the flow and how we would go. So at the end, the final column on the right, green is we're good to go, red is we're going to have to do something, and amber is let's just watch. And you can see the two rows between row 1 and row 2. There's a green that went to red, and that was because we'd gone from 10, and I can't read it from here, sorry, but I think it was about 10 scheduled surgeries, and all of a sudden it bumped up to 12. And I know that doesn't seem a lot, but when you've got finite number of beds, that's a lot. So that became red, and that's when we had to watch. So that's what we would do every week. So then we started to understand that we needed to really level load the number of kids that were coming in every day. So we sort of made that visible to support it. And then in the bottom, we changed the schedule. So we didn't reduce the number of number of cases that we did, but we looked at the ratio of when they come to the unit after the surgery, how long they're going to stay. So whether they're a short stay in the unit or a long stay, because if we get those kids, get those beds flowing, we knew that we would have the capacity and not have to cancel any of the scheduled cases. So they may seem really simple changes, but gee, they were effective. And so as our thinking advanced, so did our map and our understanding of the actual flow. So we sort of started to understand volumes and, you know, yes, these kids were coming from other places, but how many of them were coming? So even though the surgery still remained the thickest line and the biggest volume, we got to have a look at other volumes and how that impacted on the flow. So again, we go back to the map, and here we are. We've got to a stage where we've now, our meetings become quite popular, our Thursday meeting. And so pretty soon we had people, it was an open invitation anyway, but we soon had lots of great stakeholders, very influential, powerful, impactful. We had the chief of cardiology want to attend, and various other, because they were curious, I think, as to what we were doing and that understanding and the breaking down of those silos. And so with that, we we achieved something, Dan. We actually made, I think we achieved what people thought we may not be able to achieve.
Yeah, we got to the end of the fiscal year and we had only 62 cases canceled instead of the 82 the year before. And you might think, well, we just reduced the number of surgeries, but we didn't. The number of cases went up by almost 10%, and our bed days went up by 20%. So in addition to increasing our volume, we actually decreased our cancellation rates substantially below the year before. So this was really felt to be a substantial win for the team and for the overall heart center.
Yeah, it was terrific. And I'm still, the relationship I have with Bob and with Marlene continues, and there's plenty of others now as well. But it was, you know, I mean, it was thanks to them that this work was as successful as it was.
So Matt, can you put me back on? Oh, I'm there. There I am. Thanks, Dan and Janelle. In the interest of time, we're going to keep going. I left that slide up there, the building relationship slide. I know Matt's just taken it down, but there it is. I think this is a really important segue into the next section. And we're now going to hear from both Edgar and John. After each time they speak, they pose a question either for you, Janelle, or Dan. So we'll be interested in your answers, and we're going to really challenge Matt with his ability to jump around with his producing skills here. So if we could have the first video, Matt, that would be fantastic.
Because I have a couple things that really struck me right off the bat. And I want to put this in the context of even larger than lean, if you can believe this. We're really talking about the broader theory of making change, any change in any system. Because what's so striking is that when you begin to plan some kind of a change process, you very quickly discover complexities that you may not have noticed when you first defined a problem. And the problem itself changes as you discover these complexities. I heard Dr. Murphy say that the timing and the inability to do it just when you needed to was not initially the first thing that you started with. You in a way discovered that. Now, the key to all of this is a tool that I first introduced in the 70s called job role mapping, where you put someone in the center and examine all the people that person is connected with somehow, because that is your initial definition of the system. And I thought it was brilliant the way Joanelle depicted that with, you know, using colors for different types of occupations that are involved, using arrows. They could be, if the person in the center is not Joanelle, but one of the people in the system. If you use the tool to put them in the center and say, well, what are all the people they are connected to? You then identify two-way arrows where you discover that these people expect things of each other. And it's those expectations of each other that build the relationship that Dr. Murphy said in the end produces a group that know each other. Now that only happens if you see who needs to be connected and then encourage those people through that role mapping exercise to maybe actually get together and talk to each other, because you need that to make the change. But the secondary effect is you're building a very powerful group that then can make other changes that you might not have considered. So I'll probably have a couple more comments, but I want to really focus on how important that role mapping is and how easy a tool that is to put someone in the center and say, well, let's examine who are all the people that that person is already connected to and needs to be connected to if we're going to get permission from that person to make some changes in that person's department, which is where the change often breaks down. Somebody in the system wasn't thought of, they don't see any point in making changes, so the whole thing collapses. So these big role maps are, for me, the key, and they serve as a very good counterpoint to the A3 process. But what I notice is, in a way, that maybe you could almost argue that building those relationships enhanced the ability to do the A3s, rather than the A3s creating the possibility of building relationships. They are intertwined, and it's foolish to say you should always start with the problem or you should always start with a system. You've got to do both. And then finally, you do need the third party. I'm not sure these things can really happen without the Jonels, sort of masterminding and facilitating, seeing the system, not necessarily being an active participant, but being the catalyst, the glue, the architect. The multiple roles that she played are absolutely essential to any change process, not just to this particular case. So I'll stop there.
Okay, I'll add. I mean, thanks, Ed, but also thanks, Dan and Janelle. It is a great story. I think it's one that thanks for doing the work, for stopping all those cancellations and all those families that came all the way to Palo Alto to have their kids taken care of. I didn't have to go back, and possibly that child getting conditions getting worse. So this isn't just an academic exercise. You're actually making children healthier. And for doing that work and then sharing the story, because just to step back a little bit, Ed, I imagine there are people today that don't exactly know some of the context of this story. So we, Ed and I and others here have been having this dialogue now. I think this is the 6th year where we're simply exploring the relationship of the social and the technical. I think for most part, you know, we have violent agreement that they're both critically important and that they're intertwined in some way. And what this affords us is the chance to explore more deeply how they're intertwined. I couldn't agree more that you know, that it's, you know, a point that these are intertwined. And I think that the role mapping does fit hand in glove with the A3 very easily. And A3 is just a way of capturing what happens in a dialogue and to capture what's happening in someone's head, what they're thinking. That's all it is. And you don't, and after some practice with it, you don't have to use the paper. The point is that people are having a dialogue where they dive into the problem and they share what they know and they uncover facts and they uncover more facts. And you use technical tools like value stream mapping to understand that. And that was part of what you did as well. And then there's a lot more in terms of flow analysis. You know, and people do flow analysis in value streams, supply chains, and factories. And your flows in hospitals are extraordinarily complex with a lot of variation and variability. And so it's all the more helpful to do that. And as soon as you do that, that becomes part of the intervention. I think one thing I'd also like to emphasize that Ed said was, so, and in fact, I'd like to ask Janelle a little bit about this. I mean, I think one of the things that I think it's safe to say is that on the performance improvement side, the process improvement side, there's often a lot of folks who get developed in technical skills, whereas actually any intervention like this is absolutely a social engagement. It's a social endeavor. And Janelle, you mentioned that you were intentional about relationships in the beginning, but you were not using this relationship mapping or role mapping. I think based upon your many years of experience, you recognize that as you're doing a value stream map, that you're also looking at body language. You're finding that person in the room who feels, to Ed's point a moment ago, who sees their work, even if no one's saying it directly, they can see this kind of gravitating to them. That maybe, and it's often, in fact, the scheduler, even in things like factories or everywhere, it's often the schedule, which is something we think of as so mundane, but actually this idea of who does what when and how we coordinate is so hugely important to any system. I mean, it's a system dimension, a system characteristic. And I guess, I don't know, throughout this process, it seemed like you were becoming more maybe intentional or aware of this as something that I bet you just naturally have learned how to do over the last 20 years. So you're highly skilled technically how to do flow analysis, but also on the social side of how to look for that body language and find the person who's going to be key here, who starts to just kind of squirm in their seat, feel uncomfortable with what's going on. How did you learn to do that? And how would you suggest someone starting out now would learn how to do that?
That's a great question, and I guess I learned it. And you're right. The person in the room was Marlene, so that was clear that, and that's why I kept sort of heading towards that scheduling process. But I think it's just that curiosity. I came in. I was new to the organisation. I was from Australia. I had an accent. I felt like I had to sort of not work hard, but yeah, maybe I was behind the eight ball a bit. So I was out asking curious questions, and because I clearly did not know the answers, so I was very humble. I was very patient, and I just sort of connected with the people and built that trust by and doing that helping. I think that really helped build the relationships as well. And yes, it comes easy for some people, and for some people it doesn't. I guess I sort of gravitate towards the socio side of more than the technical, because the technical you can, it's quite easy to learn. We're all here learning about it. But anyway, how I would go about, there's actually some folks back in Stanford who have asked me exactly that, how to do it. So the first thing we've done is read Humble Inquiry, Edgar Schein's book, and Denise, yes, I did read it. And also just to start small. So not try and sort of make friends or build these relationships with everybody, but just go intentionally with one, and just, like I said, be curious and open and honest.
So what I hear in this that seems so important to me is that the Gemba includes not just careful observation, but actually sitting down with some of the key people that you see in the workflow and saying, let's draw your map to see who else you respond to, because until I know who you respond to, I don't know who else is in that system that might have to be examined if the change is going to actually happen, which might be another department that has records that need. I mean, to me, the classic case was the cancer center that couldn't implement nurses talking to their patients before the morning when they were going to get their chemotherapy, because the records department wouldn't release the records for those patients, because no one had ever talked to the manager of the records department and convinced him that there might be some reason for her to release those records. And the whole thing collapsed because one person could stop the process, and no one had thought to involve him early to find out what he would need or she would need to make it feasible. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of you, the facilitator, seeing who has to be moved for any of this to happen, and create maps around them to see what it would take to move them.
I agree.
You did that.
So you've been doing this for a long time, right? And so you always do that. So you find these things, you're doing the mapping, you do whatever you're doing, you're understanding the situation. And then through that, one thing leads to another, the disconnects between silos. And you've been doing that without relationship maps.
Correct.
But I guess at a point to be made here is the relationship map can be an explicit way of doing that as in a tangible way, so we can all be aware of what we're doing and why. So you learned how to do it through many years of experience. And it could be by bringing this tool and emphasis in it could help us all be a lot more effective as we do interventions as facilitators. Actually, I've included some years ago those exact role maps in part of the A3 process. They can fit in very easily. But the issue is really whether any tool, whether it's a relationship map or a A3 or a value stream map, it's what goes on behind that, what goes on beyond what you can just see on the paper, that tells the complete story and leads to the complete the dramatic improvement, which we saw this time. I'd also like to ask a bit of a question. It sounds like in terms of what you actually did, actually one question for Dan, as you described that you know the cancellations were increasing over what they had been before. So you began with a clear problem. So I would like to say, Ed, actually, in response to your earlier point, that before the A3 or the map, there's a relationship. I say the first thing is the problem. And that tells who needs to be involved in whatever it is we're going to do, who we need to develop relationships with, what process we need to understand. In this case, you mentioned, Dan, that there was a clear mandate from the board because they were increasing. Do you know why? Two things. One, why they were increasing more this year than before that caught the attention of the board. And you're shaking your head no. And secondly, what is it you actually did? Relationships were formed. What is it that was actually done to change the work or change the process so that the cancellations reduced?
Yeah, that's a great question. We had no clue, and the relationships, a lot of them were already formed in that year before by Janelle. And we spent an agonizingly long amount of time on the left side of the A3 the first several months of this process, trying to figure out what was going on. And I would say, in my view, the changes we made were very modest. We made the schedule visible to people, so people knew it was out there, wasn't a secret. We actually got the surgeons to look at their cases and split them into short or long expected lengths of stay. It was their choice. We didn't tell them how to do it. And then based on that, we actually got the surgeons at their own initiative to agree to a template where there were a certain amount of shorts each week and a certain amount of longs, which meant that we could flow at a certain rate if we were correct in our estimations. And we had a modest improvement. We reduced it from 82 to 62. That's still 62 cases canceled. That's not exactly what we have in mind. But what we didn't have was major train wrecks. We didn't have, we scheduled 18 surgeries and only got to do 12. So I think these modest changes, with everyone's agreement and with very close attention to what was happening, allowed us to continue the work. And Janelle, anything else that you can think of that we did specifically in terms of actions to induce this change?
I think it was making it, as you said before, Dan, making it visible to everybody. So, everybody saw everything, and that data and facts and the aha moments that we literally, you would hear them go, aha, they hadn't seen it before.
Yeah.
Since one of the biggest changes that both John and Dr. Murphy have highlighted is that you've now built a group that has relationships, it would be really interesting to hear Janelle speculate a little bit on what she did to facilitate the building of that group, because that does remain a kind of a mystery, and why I think the third party facilitator often is crucial to relationship building. So Janelle, is that a fair question to you? What were some of the things you did to help build those relationships?
It's a great question, of course. And so what we did is we just set up immediately, like I said in the presentation, that regular huddle every Thursday and presenting data and facts. And if they asked for something, we presented it. So it wasn't, it was intentional, but it wasn't sort of like the agenda was very much, let's just review the data. What is it telling us? Get to know the current state. So there was no real pressure to achieve anything and to understand what the data and facts were telling us. And I think with that came those, like I said, those requests that we would just, in between huddles, we would then be racing around getting the data that we needed. But we soon moved those meetings to a bit longer, where we sort of now still have that predictor tool, you know, reflection on last week and what's going to happen this week. And now the second part, there's a lot of talk and a lot of interest in, well, what are we going to do now? How can we continue to further improve? So we didn't have a lunch. We didn't have anything special because of COVID, of course. So it was really all via Zoom. And like I said, the attendance grew from 5 to 15 or so, with some really senior leaders from across the organisation wanting to attend.
You're pretty modest, Janelle. I would say the other thing is, being an Australian, you brought a lot of fun to this group. We had a lot of fun. We laughed a lot. There was immense psychological safety, and starting with that small group. So don't gainsay that. Don't sell yourself short. It was really a lot of fun. People wanted to be involved and wanted to do something together. So
yeah, thanks, Dan.
What I hear in that that's crucial is meetings, lunches, dinners, getting people together who normally might, from a role point of view, have no reason to talk to each other. Whenever I've seen successful projects like this, and this is what Karen did a lot of when she was masterminding some of this stuff, is creating a lunch to which you invite two of the people who need to have a relationship with each other, but neither of them knew it. But over lunch, they discover each other. So those kinds of interventions where the third party, the facilitator, the improvement coordinator, has the means of bringing people together in situations where they will discover each other and then facilitate furthering those relationships. That to me is a crucial part of the socio part of socio-technical, is to manage all that social process so that a system like what Dr. Murphy is referring to ends up being there. A bunch of people who now know each other, who can tackle the next big problem that they don't even know yet what it'll be. But you've now got a group that's ready to tackle a new problem, which you didn't have before. And in that sense, I do argue with John that socio can precede having a problem. It's often important, and Karen Frush made this point over and over again, you can build the group first so that when a problem comes along, they are ready to deal with it, because they've already got the relationships that they need to tackle the complexity and the wickedness that turns out to be there. I'd love to know if Dan would agree to that.
yeah, the work that Janelle put in to build this group on the other projects for that year before really made a difference. And obviously, once this group started working on this problem, that really bound us together. So I think it's both; they're intertwined. The group got much tighter once we were working on something that everybody agreed was a big problem. Before, it was a little bit, people are working on different things, but the group was forming, and I think it works both ways. And you and John have both said that.
Intertwining again, that John referred to.
It's intertwining. It's certainly creating the environment, an environment of great working relationships. One of the things as we prepared this year that was helpful to me, Ed, is when Peter actually described some of the deliberations you went through and deciding what to call level 2 and what it means. And I've thought a lot about that since then. I think it's worth this entire body of people, of 300 or so people, thinking about that and how we, to me, what's great, the opportunity we have here is to explore all this further. Just as Dan, you pointed out, and Janelle, you pointed out, even in terms of the problem you're trying to solve, you haven't gotten that far, but you understand it a lot more deeply, and you build a team that can go much further with it. Maybe similarly, as a community here, if Ed and I have been up here, yapping for 6 years, then it's a chance for everyone to get involved, really, to dive into. We know that there is an intertwining. There's a complex interrelationship. And I'm not even interested in the ultimate answer. I can't tell you how many times I've given someone a question that I just wanted to be a question that they would take with them for their hope forever. And 2 years later, they come back and say, I've written a book. I have the answer to the question you gave me. I've written a book about it. I said, no, it's social and technical is outrageously intertwined and critical. We often leave out either one. And when we do, it's at great loss. And when it comes to the work that you guys do, that's tragedy if they're not both included. I do think there's a higher level problem to solve that we all come together. That's why we're at the hospital. There's a reason we all come together that has to do with some problem we solve for society. So we're a children's hospital, and so we're trying to make children healthier, and that is the ultimate aim. But I creating this environment, though, and one of the things that's complex in this regard, Ed, to me, is I look at healthcare, is these teams are so dynamic. It's not just one team. But the time that I've spent in a hospital setting, you go one meeting to the next, and the same people are mixing, matching. So it's not just one team that we say now we're a team that can do this on. It's people are coming and going for different problems. Very complex in itself. So the more you can be creating an overall environment of trust, psychological safety, as Amy Edmondson would tell us, I think it's absolutely critical. And the word, back to what level 2 even means, and I'm not going to try to define it here. You've written a book about it. You and Peter talk about it a lot. But this notion of trust, and on the lean side of things as well, or again, forget the word lean. If we're talking about organizations working well, trust is absolutely essential as a foundation for what's happening. So even thinking about trust, what is it? And what trust is required for a team to be able to work successfully to accomplish any goal, whether it's to fly the Blue Angels or go to the moon, or to execute a surgical schedule that to an outsider like me it seems doable, but I'm sure it's more complex than I realize.
Before we finished, one thing that didn't get mentioned is that, Janelle, you did a lot of time in the hospital in Gemba with people, but these meetings, these huddles were all virtual. This was all by Zoom, and we could not have done this, gotten this group of people together on a regular basis in person at one board. So I think we actually had an advantage being virtual during this time. And as we look forward to how do we keep groups together, I think we've learned a lot from that too.
Agreed. Definitely.
Well, it looks like we've lost our friend Dr. Platchek, whether that's connection or whether that's an emergency. Terry's actually on service this week, so we're really grateful that he could be here. I think one of the things that he's coming back. Hey,
Sorry,
Terry.
of course, the USB camera dies 5 seconds before I'm supposed to go back.
I really wanted to ask you a question, Terry. I mean, Dan and Janelle have been fantastic in presenting that work, but you and I have frequently had responsibilities for building improvement teams, for building improvement capabilities. How do we get more Janelles?
I don't know. I spent the better part of 4 months trying to convince her not to go back and see family in Australia. But I think it's one of the most important questions that you have to ask. And I think the answer is some people will naturally gravitate towards what Edgar Schein calls level 2 relationships. And some people won't. And I think that like most aspects of improvement, we need to teach folks that there is a right way to do things. And I think when systems involve humans, we must acknowledge that, and we must work to create these interpersonal connections. Now, I know John and Edgar, Edgar in particular likes to force John to say, "Hey, you focus too much on the tools." I don't necessarily agree with Edgar on some of those things. I think John has the balance right. But just as much as we're focusing on things like visual management, eliminating waste, understanding process, value stream, thinking about the value stream, we have to also focus on the people. Alistair asked a question a little bit earlier: were there allergies? Did people resist? Yes, absolutely, and they've been for years. I mean, like the cardiac surgeons, of course, everyone else is to blame, and you just invent what the causes of these things were, and what the personal relationships allowed were people to turn off their reptilian brain and use their human brain to listen and to understand the data and to try to come up with countermeasures and accept that they were experiments and understand that the experiments could fail. So to answer your short question in a very long way, Denise, we're actively looking to teach this in all members of our improvement program. I think it's part learning the concepts, and I think, like most things, it's part an apprenticeship. But people that will be growing up in our improvement department, this is going to be standard fare. How do you build those level 2 relationships?
I think it's a really important thing for us to think about. And, we had I think Dan and I together had the opportunity to go to Ed and Peter's course on how to do that mapping. And, actually the first time that I used it was when Janelle and I put this presentation together, and it made me think, oh my goodness, why haven't I been doing this forever? And, what would it look like to intentionally not only start with a value stream map, but also start with a relationship map, and thinking about, who do we as facilitators of improvement already have relationships with, and who do we need to, and, who can influence the person that we can't influence, which I think that was where that turned out to be quite useful for Janelle, although she just really likes the challenge of, turning someone around. So, and getting someone on board. So I think, we did have a bit of a conversation about how, you could use it at the beginning, you could use it on a regular cadence in terms of every time you stop through a value stream improvement exercise, whether it's 2 monthly, 3 monthly, 6 monthly, where are we now with these relationships, and what do we need to think about going forward? I don't know, Janelle, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly, Denise, because after we'd finished it at a glance with that color coding, so the colors were very different stakeholders, we saw that it was heavily physician-based, but we perhaps not so much with the nursing. And so now the next step is, how do we engage nurses more, because they're so important in all of this. So we'd sort of at the time just focused on the surgeons and the physicians. So and also what I didn't get a chance to really point out is the thickness of the lines was, the time I spent, and also the depth of the relationship, and whether it had got to a type 2, and also the importance of it. So there's so many different ways you can use that map. So thanks.
Yeah, I would suggest we use joy and laughter as a metric for judging the quality of those relationships, and that as at the same time, because that's a very powerful indicator of how things are working.
Yeah,
I recall an argument. Sorry about it, Denise, that you and I were having about was it a year and a half ago? And you said, "Well, I don't know, Terry. What are you going to do? Just measure the number of type 2 relationships that we create?" And I think the answer is yes. I actually do think we need to start measuring that. It was a flippant comment, but I think it's a very insightful one.
Yeah. Relational coordination, just measuring the communication and the relationships and how people interact with each other. And you do that intuitively, Janelle, but there are ways to do that in a concrete way to actually measure that and demonstrate improvement. So I think it's a great next step.
So at our last session, and I know we've only got a couple of minutes on the clock, but actually, John, I think there's one final video, and John left us with a challenge. He's actually here on backstage, but we won't make him
You
do
can
it.
make it 10 seconds, sure.
That all OD departments and PI departments be merged. And that if not all of them, that someone in this group would take that on as a challenge to give it a try. They should be done together.
What do you think about that, Terry?
So I immediately went and asked our chief of HR if they'd let us merge performance improvement and OD. I didn't immediately get a taker, but just to John's really backstage, we really are engaging in thinking about the what we call them, the fundamental principles of leadership at Stanford Children's, and we're doing that actually in combination with performance improvement and OD. And we have a role of someone who's leading what we call our Packard quality management system, our capability development. And we're trying to share those functions with OD. I think what Edgar, who many people call the grandparent of organizational development, has taught us is they are incredibly, it is incredibly important to think of improvement, not only from a technical lens, but also from that social lens, that lens that much of organizational development teaches us about. So we're working on it, John.
Thanks, Terry. It's interesting when I worked with the CEO at City of Melbourne, Kathy Alexander, and she saw exactly what John saw, and it's really about that ability to partner across those two teams, and you can't have a separate leadership program going on and an improvement program on the other side. So she tried for 6 months to get these two teams working together, and then she did exactly what John said. She said, well, if you can't work together, I'm going to put you together, and that turned out to be a very successful venture. And actually, as the improvement lead, it's how I learned about Edgar Schein. So I was totally grateful for that move from Kathy Alexander, and it's absolutely changed my life. And not quite as much as when I moved to Stanford and found that Edgar lived across the road, and we stumbled across him one day in a restaurant. So it's been a joyous experience. So any final comments, Terry, as we're closing? I really appreciate you coming off service today and giving us your time.
I'll just say that, yes, Janelle is extraordinary, and so are Dan. And I think that the task for all of us is how can we take these improvements to be done by mere mortals. And I think there's a way. I think we can learn a lot from what Janelle and Dan have done. And then to borrow a line from what Dan works on, which is a lot of the wellness of care providers here. It is a virtual cycle. If you can create these relationships and you can create the improvement, as we all know, you can you can increase value, not just for our patients in healthcare, but in the process, you increase the wellness of the people that are doing the work. And I think all of us know, many of us come to work because of the relationships that we have. I certainly get a lot from my relationship with the four of you. It is a virtuous cycle. I really hope that we all can, the broader healthcare community can take that to heart and realize that actually having a meal with somebody and spending the time to talk to them, not in a 10-minute Zoom encounter, but in a real conversation, actually can move the improvements forward.
Thanks, Terry, and Dan and Janelle. Thanks for, we're coming from all sorts of time zones here. So it's getting close to 1 o'clock in Adelaide, and I'm starting to fail a bit, but we've got more to come, and I really enjoyed that session. I'll hand back to Christopher now.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Denise.